Just after midnight on June 1st, 1962, Israel would execute their first and only death sentence. The man's name was Adolf Eichmann. He had been found guilty on all counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He had been partially acquitted for his membership in the Nazi Party. But before all of that, he had fled Europe to avoid facing prosecution for the role he played in World War II. And he had been kidnapped out of Argentina to stand trial in Israel. But why? And who was Adolf Eichmann? Adolf Eichmann was born in Solingen, Germany on March 19, 1906. When he was still very young, his family moved to Linz, Austria. After completing his basic education, he began training to become a mechanical engineer. However, due to the Great Depression in the 1920s, he didn't complete his training and he never sought higher education. He drifted from job to job as a traveling salesman. When he was prompted by acquaintance Ernest Kaltenbrunner, he joined the Austrian Nationalist Social Party and the SS, the paramilitary force for the Nazi Party. This would serve as a problem to Eichmann when in 1933, as Hitler came into power, Austria banned membership in the Austrian Nazi Party. So, like many other Austrian Nazis, Eichmann fled to Bavaria. In August 1933, he joined the Austrian Legion, an association for Austrian Nazis. During this time, he had a few months of military training. In 1934, with the rank of sergeant, he joined the Service Security Main Office, the SD. There, he worked with a section that included dealing with Jewish affairs. During the Anschluss in March 1938, Eichmann personally led a raid on the Jewish Cultural Community offices. He worked to organize the Central Office of Jewish Immigration in Vienna. This office facilitated the immigration of an estimated 110,000 Austrian Jews from August 1938 to June 1939. The central office was so successful, it created the model now known as the Vienna model for a Reich-wide central office. Eichmann led the central office starting in October 1939. Shortly after the outbreak of World War II, he organized the first attempt of mass deportation from the Greater German Reich. After the foundation of the RHSA, the Reich Security Main Office, Eichmann had become the director of the RHSA section of clearing activities. Clearing activities means the deportation of Jews from their homes, which would later be given to Germans. After March 1941, he became the director of Jewish affairs. In the time after August 1941, preparations for the final solution were beginning to be made, the final solution being the plan to commit genocide against Jews. This culminated in the Wannsee Conference, in which the senior government officials and the SS leaders got together to ensure that all the various departments were doing their parts to contribute to genocide. Eichmann was named the chief executioner for the part of organizing the identification, assembly, and transportation of Jews to the execution camps like Auschwitz. The most damning of Eichmann's crimes came from the German occupation of Hungary. Eichmann directly oversaw the deportation of Hungarian Jews from April to July of 1942. Of those deported, only 10 to 15% were chosen as laborers. The rest were killed. Over 400,000 Jews were killed from Hungary's over 700,000 total Jewish population. Throughout October and November, he organized the forced march of tens of thousands of Jews from Budapest to Vienna. After World War II, Eichmann had been captured by U.S. troops but escaped from a prison camp in 1946. He lived in Germany for several years under fake identities. Meanwhile, other Nazi officials gave damning evidence against Eichmann at the Nuremberg trials. He obtained a false passport under the name of Ricardo Clement and traveled through a series of safe houses set up by Bishop Alois Hudal. There, he and his family emigrated to Argentina in 1950. Before his capture, he had been employed at a Mercedes-Benz factory. Several Holocaust survivors became key parts of his capture. They joined the Mossad and were assigned to take surveillance of Eichmann at his home, the Mossad being the Israeli Secret Service. Argentina had a history of rejecting requests to extradite former Nazis now living there, so Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion decided that it would be best if Eichmann was captured and brought to Israel to stand trial. Eichmann was captured on May 11, 1960, near his home in Buenos Aires. The Mossad team had been observing his routine since April. During his capture, an agent came up to Eichmann to ask for directions. Initially skeptical, he began to leave when backup for the agent arrived. The three agents wrestled him to the ground and then moved him to a car where they hid him underneath a blanket. For 9 days, he was kept at a series of safe houses for the Mossad. Near midnight on May 20th, Eichmann was sedated and blindfolded and then brought onto a flight headed for Israel. The Mossad had prepared a fake passport as well as a fake identification card with the name Ziv Zikroni. They arrived on May 22nd. In 1950, Israel created a law called the Nazis and Nazi Collaborators Punishment Law. This law allowed Israeli courts to prosecute those who were or had worked with Nazis during World War II. Under this law, Eichmann was indicted with 15 counts of various charges. Counts 1 through 4 were for crimes against Jews. Counts 5 through 7 were for crimes against humanity against Jews. Count 8 was for war crimes. Counts 9 through 12 were for crimes against humanity against non-Jews. Counts 13 through 15 charged him for working with enemy organizations. 20 days after arriving in Israel, the trial began on April 11, 1961. Eichmann was kept in a glass box to protect him during the proceedings from assassination. The prosecution was led by Attorney General of Israel, Gideon Hausner. The prosecution's main points were as follows. Eichmann's middle position in the SS did not absolve him of his crimes. It was under his command that Jews were identified, organized, and transported the way that they were. Even if he didn't kill them directly, he should still bear the responsibility. Eichmann was a key coordinator with his superiors for the final solution. Therefore, he shared intent and responsibility for his crimes. He did not have a defense of ignorance for what was happening during the Holocaust. He had been part of the Wannsee Conference, where numerous Nazi leaders discussed methods and locations to commit the genocide. As well, after the war was over, he would boast about his work in the Holocaust. Defense was led by Nuremberg defense lawyer Robert Servatius. At the time, Israeli law did not allow for foreign lawyers to represent defendants in court. However, no Israeli lawyers would represent Eichmann in trial, so an exception was made. The defense disputed the court's authority to try Eichmann. The following 4 arguments were made. There was no chance of the judges being unbiased in a trial for crimes against Jews when the judges themselves were Jewish. The trial should not have been held because Eichmann had been kidnapped to stand trial. The law that the indictment was based off of was from 1950, making all of his charges ex post facto. The offenses were committed outside of Israel, which didn't exist at the time the crimes were committed. However, all claims were rejected by the court. The evidence for the prosecution consisted of over 100 witnesses and thousands of documents, many of which had been written and signed by Eichmann himself. Prior to the trial, only one witness had an interaction with Eichmann, while the others testified their experiences in the Holocaust and what they had faced. Defense witnesses who refused to come to Israel testified in German courts to questions sent by the Israeli court. Eichmann testified that he had only been following orders and doing what he was told to do. However, principles from Nuremberg had established that following orders could only mitigate responsibility, not completely absolve it. The defense and prosecution rested their cases in August 1961. The verdict was hundreds of pages long and was read in its entirety over the course of 2 days from December 11th to 12th, 1961. On the 12th, Eichmann was found guilty on all counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, while he was partially acquitted for his membership in hostile organizations due to the statute of limitations. On December 15th, Eichmann was sentenced to death by hanging. Although numerous appeals were made by both Eichmann and his legal team, all were rejected. On June 1st, 1962, just after midnight, Eichmann was executed. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea outside of Israel's territory. The legacy of the Eichmann Trial is deeply important to how we tell the story of World War II. The Eichmann Trial was fully televised, making it one of the first trials to be watched globally. It solidified the word Holocaust in the public consciousness, and it brought attention to the horrors of the Nazis during World War II to Jews. Hundreds of survivors got to tell their stories and their experiences during the Holocaust because of this trial. Even with the legacy of the trial, it did not come without criticism. The largest criticism, of course, was that Eichmann had been kidnapped, but other criticisms came to light as well. Israel was the sole country responsible for the prosecution of Eichmann. The Nuremberg trials were prosecuted by the International Military Tribunal, which consisted of the Allied countries in World War II. No single country prosecuted a person. There was also no chance of Eichmann getting off of any of his charges given the makeup of the court. Every judge was Jewish, as were his prosecutors. During opening statements, the lead prosecutor made a speech in Hebrew talking about the case not being about the individual or Nazis, but the history of anti-Semitism. Even with this speech from the lead prosecutor, the trial did not seem to be about Eichmann himself, but rather the crimes of the Nazi regime as a whole. As well, for Eichmann's charges, the majority were for his crimes specifically against Jews during the Holocaust. At Nuremberg, the charges against the defendants were about their crimes against groups of the various protected classes, not specifically one like Eichmann's.